There's a moment, and I've seen it happen more times than I can count now, where an alien soldier looks at a human and decides, right then, that we're a joke. It happens fast, like a blink, like a reflex they don't even know they're having. They see the size of us or the lack of it. They see the softness around our middles. They see the way we breathe too loud in pressurized corridors, the way we sweat when we're nervous, the way our hands shake a little when we're scared but we're still moving forward anyway. They take all of that in, and something clicks behind their eyes, and they make a decision. We're not worth the caution. That's the mistake. That's always been the mistake. My name is Corporal Rennick Vasquez, and I was there the day they learned it the hard way. Not that I looked like much standing next to a Varathi fire squad. I'm 5'9". I weigh maybe 170 pounds after a full meal and a long sleep. I've got a scar running from my left ear to the corner of my jaw that I got in a training accident on Kepler Station when I was 22, and I walk with a slight limp that flares up in the cold, because a piece of Dreth shrapnel is still lodged about 3 millimeters from my femoral nerve, and the surgeon said the risk of removing it outweighs the discomfort. So I limp, and sometimes when I think no one is looking, I wince. The Varathi noticed the wince. They noticed everything. They're a warrior species, 3-meter bipeds, bony ridged skulls, bilateral jaw structures that let them bite with something like 4,000 psi, natural armor plating across the back and shoulders. They're designed for war the way a hammer is designed to drive a nail. Everything about them is efficient and brutal and built to intimidate. And they were very, very good at intimidation. But none of that matters, not really, not in the long run. What matters is what happened in Docking Bay 19 on Cradle Station Alpha, on a Tuesday morning in the 43rd year of the Galactic Compact, when an old man in a faded uniform walked into a room full of alien soldiers and stopped them all cold with nothing but the truth. I'm going to tell you about that morning. I'm going to tell you everything. Cradle Station Alpha was not a glamorous posting. I need you to understand that first, because the whole thing starts with the place and the kind of people who ended up there. Cradle wasn't a fleet hub or a diplomatic nexus, or one of those gleaming compact installations they put on the recruitment posters, all glass spires and breathable atmosphere and regulated temperature. Cradle was a transit way station. It sat at a junction between 3 shipping lanes in the outer corridor sector, which sounds impressive until you realize that the corridor sector is basically the galactic equivalent of a service road. Functional, necessary, completely devoid of anything that could be called scenery. The station was old. Not old in the way that things can be old and still feel sturdy and dignified. Old in the way that makes you look at the ceiling panels and think about load-bearing calculations you don't have the math for. There were sections of the upper ring that had been sealed off for years because the structural survey came back inconclusive, and the Compact's infrastructure division had flagged it for repair funding 3 budget cycles in a row and been denied each time because Cradle Station Alpha didn't have a seat on any of the councils that decided where the money went. We had 2 rotating security teams, 1 human, 1 Tarvan, and a liaison office that technically answered to the Compact Enforcement Division, but in practice answered to nobody, because the division's regional coordinator had never once visited in person and communicated exclusively through automated dispatch messages that were always 48 hours behind the current situation. I was on the human team, 6 of us, working 12-hour rotations, responsible for 3 docking bays, a commercial promenade that was 70% empty storefronts, a cargo processing floor, and a medical annex that had 1 doctor and 2 nursing drones that were both running on outdated firmware. It was a nothing posting. But then the Varathi 7th Division came through. They weren't supposed to stop at Cradle. Their transit corridor was supposed to run them through the outer Kessel relay, bypass the corridor sector entirely, and dropped them into compact central space for a summit with the enforcement command. But there was a fuel cell malfunction on their lead carrier, the Godbreaker, which, yes, was actually the name of their command ship. And yes, we all had feelings about that, and they had to divert for repairs. The nearest docking facility, with enough clearance for a vessel that size, was Cradle Station Alpha. So one morning I came in for my shift, and the bay doors were cycling for a ship the size of a small mountain. And my station commander, Lieutenant Paola Ferretti, who was 43 years old, and had the permanent expression of a woman calculating how many bureaucratic problems were about to land on her desk, was standing at the observation window watching it come in with a coffee mug in both hands and not drinking any of it. "How long?" I asked her. "Repair estimate is 30 to 40 hours, she said. "Maybe longer if the parts have to come from the regional depot." "And their complement?" "Full fire squad, 40 soldiers plus officers." She finally took a sip of the coffee. "And a delegation staff, political officers, translators." I looked at the ship again. "We're not equipped for this." "No," she agreed, "we are not." The first 12 hours were tense but manageable. The Varathi were disciplined, you had to give them that. They came off the ship in a precise file, full armor, rifles at the standard carry position, and they moved through the docking bay with the kind of coordinated efficiency that made them look less like individual soldiers and more like a single organism with 40 sets of legs. They didn't speak unless spoken to. They didn't deviate from their assigned holding area. Their political officer, a narrower, slightly less armored Varathi named Sector Commander Gath, met briefly with Lieutenant Ferretti, confirmed the repair timeline, requested a list of station facilities available to their personnel, and then withdrew. Professional, efficient, cold. But then the repair estimates got pushed back. Parts weren't at the regional depot, they were at a Depot 2 relay jumps further out, and transit time was going to add another 36 hours minimum. So the Varathi were stuck at Cradle for the better part of 3 days. That's when things started to shift. Soldiers don't do well with waiting. Doesn't matter the species. I've seen Tarvin get agitated, seen Dreth get into equipment-damaging arguments with each other, seen even the notoriously patient Leth grow snappish and territorial after too many hours in a confined space. Waiting corrodes discipline. And 40 Varathi soldiers cooped up in a transit station that smelled like recycled air and old metal, with nothing to do and no one to impress, started to get restless. They started wandering the promenade. And they started watching us. It started small. One of the younger Varathi, I later learned his designation was Sublancer Kreth, and he couldn't have been more than the Varathi equivalent of 19 or 20, started appearing near our security station during shift changes. Not doing anything, not talking to us, just watching, studying us the way you'd study something you couldn't quite categorize. His jaw structures would shift in what I eventually understood was the Varathi expression for amusement, and then he'd move on. Then there were 2 of them. Then 5. By the second day, it felt like there was always a cluster of Varathi soldiers somewhere in our peripheral vision, watching the human security team go about our work and finding the whole thing quietly, privately hilarious. It wasn't hard to figure out why. We were small. We moved carefully in corridors they moved through like the walls weren't even there. When one of them accidentally, and I do believe it was accidental, bumped into Specialist Dara Okonkwo near the cargo processing floor, she stumbled back 3 steps and had to catch herself on a wall panel, while the Varathi soldier barely registered the contact. He glanced back at her with those flat, unreadable eyes, and something moved in his jaw structure, and he kept walking. Okonkwo caught me looking. "Don't," she said. I wasn't going to say anything. "You were thinking something." "I'm always thinking something." She straightened her uniform jacket. She was 26, 4 years my junior, and she had a jaw like a runway, strong and square and absolutely set. "They think we're soft," she said. Most people think we're soft until they've had reason to think otherwise. Well, she looked at the corridor where the Varathi had gone. Let's hope we don't give them a reason. The conversations started on the second afternoon. One of the Varathi political staff, a translator named Veth, who was something of an anomaly among them because she actually seemed curious rather than contemptuous, approached our security station and asked if she could observe our shift rotation procedures. Lieutenant Ferretti said yes, partly because diplomatic courtesy required it, and partly because Ferretti was the kind of officer who believed that genuine transparency tended to diffuse tension faster than any amount of careful positioning. So Veth stood near the desk and watched, and occasionally asked questions through her translation unit. She asked about our patrol routes. She asked about our communication protocols. She asked about the weapons we carried, standard compact sidearms, nothing impressive by any military metric. And when I showed her the stunner I had in my right holster, she examined it with a polite attentiveness that I recognized as the same expression my nephew makes when he's trying not to let me know he's unimpressed. "Your people carry these," she said. Not a question, more like she was filing it away. "Standard issue," I told her. "Against what threat?" "Whatever shows up." Her jaw moved more slowly this time, less like amusement and more like she was chewing on something. "You patrol this station with stunners, a force of 6, against potential threats you cannot predict." "That's generally how security works, yeah. The Varathi 7th does not patrol with stunners." "I know, I've seen your soldiers' weapons, impressive hardware." "It is necessary hardware," she said. "We face significant threats." "So do we." She looked at me for a long moment. "You are very small," she said. She didn't say it cruelly. She said it the way someone says it when they're genuinely trying to reconcile what they're observing with what they expected. "Your people are very small to face significant threats." "Yeah," I said, "we've heard that before." The mockery started getting less quiet on the second night. "There's a lounge area on the promenade, more of a maintenance alcove that someone had put chairs in, where the Tarvan team and the human team sometimes overlapped during low-traffic hours. The Tarvan don't have much of a social culture by human standards, but they developed a tolerance for our tendency to sit in groups and talk, which they found bewildering but not unpleasant. Some of the Varathi soldiers had started using the lounge too, just to sit, just to get out of the holding bay. That second night, 3 of them were in the lounge when Specialist Marcus Webb and I came in for our break. Webb was talking about something. I can't even remember what, some domestic complaint about the quality of the station's food replicator. And we sat down, and one of the Varathi, without turning to look at us, said something to his companion. The translation units work on a delay, a few seconds for context processing. Then the rendered version comes out through the speaker in whatever language you've set it to receive in. What came through was, "The soft ones are talking about food, of course they are." The other Varathi said something that translated as, "They think about comfort, it's all they're designed for." Webb had gone very still. I put my hand on his arm before he could do anything, and I kept my voice level. "Translation units work both ways," I said, loudly enough for the room. The Varathi turned. Sub-Lancer Kreth, the young one who'd been watching us, was one of the 3. He looked at me without any apparent embarrassment. "We know," he said. There was a pause that stretched out long enough to have its own weather. "Humans," Kreth said, "have a history, we know the history." "Do you?" "We have read your records in the compact archives, your wars, your victories." He leaned forward slightly, the armor plates across his shoulders shifting. "They are interesting, in the way that small things that survive by luck are interesting." I looked at him. "Small things. Your species is soft. Your world is soft, a garden world by the standards of the corridor. You have no natural armor, no natural venom, no enhanced senses. You are prey-shaped. He said it plainly with no visible malice, which somehow made it worse. How do you explain surviving your own history? Not wisdom, not strength. A pause. Perhaps only luck. Webb said my name quietly, warning me. I didn't answer Kreth. Not right then, because there was nothing I could say in that lounge to those soldiers on that particular night that would have carried any weight. You can't argue someone into respect. You can only show them something true enough that they have to reckon with it on their own. But I thought about what he'd said for the rest of the shift. Prey-shaped. I thought about that for a long time. Lieutenant Ferretti called a team meeting the next morning. She stood at the head of the table in our briefing room, which was a converted storage closet with a folding table and 6 chairs, and a display screen that flickered in the upper left corner, and she looked at all of us and said, "I know it's been uncomfortable." Nobody said anything. "I'm not going to tell you it's not happening," she continued, "because it is, and it's going to keep happening for the next 30 hours until their repair parts arrive and they leave." She put both hands flat on the table. "But I need every one of you to maintain composure. We are not going to give them any ammunition." "They already have plenty of ammunition, Lieutenant," Okonkwo said. "They have opinions," Ferretti corrected. "Opinions aren't ammunition, unless we react to them like they are." Webb had his jaw set in that particular way that meant he was working very hard at not saying what he was thinking. "With respect, ma'am, they're calling us prey animals. That's not something you just absorb." "No," Ferretti agreed. "It's not." She pulled up something on the display, a personnel file, I realized, scrolling too fast for me to read clearly. "That's why I've requested a resource." "What kind of resource?" She looked at the display for a moment before she answered. "Compact Veterans Liaison sent someone over from the regional office this morning," she said. "He arrived about 40 minutes ago. He's in the medical annex getting his mobility brace adjusted." A pause. "He's 81 years old, so we're going to give him a few minutes." The briefing room went quiet. "Who is he?" Webb asked. Ferretti turned the display to face us. The personnel file was there, a photograph, decades old, and the man in it was unmistakably young and wearing a uniform I didn't recognize at first. And then I did, because I'd seen it in history files and in the memorials and in the compact archives where Kreth claimed to have done his reading. 7th Human Death War. Early engagement, before the compact even existed in its current form. The name at the top of the file was Master Sergeant Olin Bryce, and below the name was a list of citations and commendations that went down the screen further than I could read in the time I had. "He was in the area," Ferretti said. "Visiting family, apparently. When I filed the situation report and the request for support, someone at Liaison saw the flag and called him." She looked at us. "He agreed to come." "Why?" Okonkwo asked. Ferretti's expression shifted, not quite a smile, something quieter and harder. "Because, apparently, he's heard what they've been saying, and he has opinions about that." Part 2, the man who shouldn't still be standing. I met Olin Bryce in the corridor outside the medical annex at 9:40 station time. He was leaning on a cane, not the sleek carbon composite kind, but an actual wooden one that he'd clearly had for years, because the handle was worn smooth in the exact shape of his palm. He was wearing his uniform, the old kind, the pre-compact design with the different collar cut and the rank pins arranged in the way they'd stopped doing after the reorganization, and it fit him with the loose patience of clothing that has been worn and washed and worn again many hundreds of times. He was not a large man. Whatever size and mass he might have had in his 30s, age and time had worked on him, and what was left was lean and spare and careful. He stood with the slight forward tilt of someone managing chronic pain without making a production of it, and his hair was white and cut close, and his eyes were the color of deep water, dark and still and very, very observant. He looked at me when I came down the corridor, and he didn't wait for me to speak. "Corporal Vasquez," he said. His voice was steady, not loud. "Rennick, yes." "Yes, sir." "Don't call me sir. I've been retired for 19 years. Call me Olin." "Yes, Olin." He nodded, apparently satisfied. "Walk with me. I want to see the bay before I see the soldiers." We walked. He moved slowly, not because he was uncertain, but because the brace on his left leg was a mechanical assist, and the gait it produced was measured and deliberate. I slowed to match him and didn't make a thing of it. "How many?" he asked. 40 line soldiers, several political staff, a translator named Veth who's been the most communicative. Varathi 7th. He said it the way someone says the name of a dog breed that's bitten them before, not with fear, just accurate recognition. Their commander. Sector Commander Gath. I've had almost no direct contact. He communicates through Veth. Gath. Olin was quiet for a moment. "I know that name, not him, his predecessor. Gath is a lineage title their command families passed them. The Gath I knew was at Kessel Platform 40 years ago." He glanced at me sideways. "Different situation, long story." "What happened?" "Later," he said. "First show me the bay." We stood at the observation window above docking bay 19 and looked down at the Godbreaker. Even from above, it was an extraordinary thing to behold. The Varathi designed their warships the way they designed themselves, for maximum intimidation value. The hull was matte black with banded red detailing along the engine nacelles, and the bow of the ship was constructed to suggest, very deliberately, the forward ridge of a Varathi skull. They'd been doing that for generations, building ships that looked like the faces of soldiers charging at you. It worked, it definitely worked. Olin studied it for a while. "I've seen the Godbreaker class before," he said. "Third generation build. They redesigned the ventral plating after the second generation had stability issues in high gravity engagement." He tilted his head slightly. "They corrected most of the problems, not all of them." I looked at him. "You know their ship classes." "I spent 40 years learning everything about them that I could." He said it simply. When something nearly kills you repeatedly, it helps to know it very well. Below us, a cluster of Varathi soldiers were moving along the lower level of the bay, part of the group that had been given exercise clearance to use the transit corridor on alternating shifts. Even from up here, their size was apparent. They moved with that coordinated certainty I'd noticed from the beginning. "They told us we were prey-shaped," I said. Olin didn't react to that immediately. He watched the soldiers below, his expression unreadable. "Did they?" he said. "One of the younger ones, Sub-Lancer, he said our species survived on luck, not strength." "Oh." "He wasn't wrong that we're physically smaller." "No," Olin said, "he wasn't wrong about that." He turned from the window. "Come on. Let me tell you something while we walk." He told me about Kessel Platform while we walked the upper ring. He told it in the measured, careful way of someone who has told a story many times and stripped it down to what matters, the way a river stone gets smooth. Not because the original shape was wrong, but because the current has been working on it long enough to find the truth of it. He'd been 24 years old, a fire team sergeant in the 7th Human Death War, which preceded the Compact by roughly a decade, and was the bloody, grinding conflict that had forced all the major species to decide whether mutual annihilation was actually preferable to negotiation. Most of them eventually decided it was not, but the war had to work its way through several 100,000 casualties on all sides before everyone got to that particular conclusion. Kessel Platform was a compact predecessor installation, a mixed-species refueling post in a disputed zone. When the Dreth advanced into that section of the corridor, the evacuation order came down, but the transit shuttles were already overwhelmed, and the Dreth were moving faster than projected. So a small holding force, 23 humans, 11 Tarvin, had stayed behind to buy time. Olin was the last sergeant standing when the relief force arrived, 6 hours later. He described it without drama. He said the hardest part wasn't the initial engagement. It was the 4th hour, when you've been in contact that long and everything hurts and the adrenaline has been used up, and your body is telling you with absolute clarity that it cannot continue, and you do the thing you have to do next anyway, and then the thing after that. The Dreth had better armor, he said, harder exoskeleton, faster reflexes, 3 times our physical strength in individual combat, and we held the platform. How? He was quiet for a few steps. We used the station, he said. We knew every corridor, every panel, every structural weakness. We fought in a way that made their advantages useless and turned our limitations into terrain. A pause. We were also very angry. I looked at him. Anger matters, he said. Not blinding anger, controlled anger. The kind that makes you very clear about what you will not allow. He glanced at me. You felt it. Yeah. Good. He stopped walking and faced me directly. What the young soldier said to you about luck, about prey, that comes from a misreading of the record. They read the compact archives. The archives contain the facts of battles, numbers, dates, outcomes. He tapped his cane lightly against the deck. They don't contain the inside of it. They don't tell you what it costs. They don't tell you that a human being can look at something 3 times their size and armed with weapons that should be instantly lethal and decide, right then, that losing is not acceptable. He met my eyes. They read about outcomes. They haven't had to understand how. We walked for a while in silence. Are you going to talk to them? I asked. The Varathi. I'm going to do better than that, Olin said. I'm going to show them something. Part 3, the meeting. Lieutenant Ferretti arranged it. I don't know exactly what she said to Sector Commander Gath or Veth II when she made the request. Knowing Ferretti, she probably framed it as a diplomatic courtesy, an opportunity for cultural exchange, something that could be included in the formal report of the station visit as evidence of productive interspecies relations. She was very good at finding the frame that made a thing happen. Gath agreed. I think his agreement was partly genuine curiosity, and partly the calculation that anything that occupied his soldiers for a few hours during the extended wait was preferable to restless troops and accumulating tension. They arranged it for 1400 station time in the large cargo bay, the only space on Cradle big enough to hold 40 Varathi soldiers and still feel like something other than a confined room. The bay was mostly cleared out, containers pushed to the walls, the floor swept, the overhead lights adjusted to full spectrum. Ferretti's team set up a small elevated platform at one end with a single chair and a microphone unit. I watched them file in. It's one thing to see them in the corridors, in small groups, at a distance. 40 Varathi soldiers standing in formation in an enclosed space is a genuinely different sensory experience. The sheer physical presence, the height, the bulk, the body heat, the sound of their breathing, the subtle constant movement of their jaw structures. It's overwhelming in a way that your hindbrain notices before your conscious mind catches up. Sublancer Kreth was near the front. He was watching the empty platform with an expression that I was beginning to read as guarded interest, like he'd decided to wait and see before committing to an opinion, but was already leaning toward dismissal. Veth II was standing to one side with her translation unit, and she gave me a small, careful nod when she saw me. Ferretti was at the back. She caught my eye and tilted her head slightly toward the entry corridor, which meant Olin was ready. I went and got him. He was in the corridor just outside the bay, and he was doing something I didn't expect. He was standing still, absolutely still, with his cane in his right hand, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and deliberate. Not the stillness of nervousness, not the stillness of someone gathering courage. The stillness of someone who has done this particular kind of thing so many times that they know how to settle themselves into it. The way a musician finds the right posture before the first note. He stood like that for maybe 30 seconds. Then he opened his eyes. "Ready?" I asked. "Been ready for 40 years, he said. Then almost to himself, just reminding myself what for. He straightened. He was not a tall man, but something happened when he straightened, something in the way he organized himself, the way his shoulders set, the way his chin came up, that changed the quality of the space he was standing in. He walked into the cargo bay. The response was immediate, and I need to be honest about it. They laughed. Not all of them, and not all-out falling down laughter. It was the quieter kind, the jaw structure movement I'd learned to read, a murmur that ran through the assembly, a deliberate adjustment of postures. But it was unmistakable. The Varathi equivalent of this. This is what they brought us. An old man with a cane, in an antique uniform, moving slowly across a cargo bay floor, because his leg won't let him move any other way. Sublancer Kreth said something to the soldier next to him. The translation units were off for most of the assembly. They'd been configured to broadcast wall mode for Olin's session, so I didn't catch it. But I saw the gesture he made. A small, dismissive one. Olin walked to the platform. He climbed the 2 steps to the elevated area, slowly, the cane first, then the right foot, then the left with care. And he sat down in the chair and he put the cane across his knees and he looked out at 40 Varathi soldiers. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Just looked. And something strange happened in that long moment. The laughter, the murmuring, the restlessness, it didn't stop immediately. But it slowed, because Olin was looking at them in a particular way, not challenging, not defensive, something more precise than either. He was looking at them the way you look at something when you are completely unafraid of it, not fearless in the way of ignorance, but fearless in the way of a person who has stood in front of things much larger and more dangerous than this, and is still, unmistakably, here. The room settled. Olin said, "Good afternoon." His voice came out flat and clear through the amplification. No warmth in the greeting, no ceremony, just words landing. Veth II translated. There was a brief rustle from the assembly. "I understand," Olin continued, "that there have been some conversations over the past 2 days about human beings, about our capabilities, about our history, about what it means that a species that looks like us has managed to survive everything that our particular corner of the galaxy has thrown at it." He paused, let Veth II catch up. "I'm not going to argue with you about the physical facts," he said. "You're larger than us. Your natural armor is superior. Your sensory systems are more acute. Your individual combat capability, all other factors being equal, is significantly greater than a human being's." He shifted the cane slightly across his knees. "That's all true. I know it's true because I've spent a considerable portion of my life standing in rooms like this one, with beings considerably more dangerous than I am, and surviving it." A movement in the assembly, not quite a sound. Something more like a collective recalibration. "What I want to tell you," Olin said, "is something you won't find in the compact archives, something that doesn't get written down very well because the people who understand it best are usually too busy actually doing it to take careful notes." He looked at the front row, at Kreth specifically, though how deliberately I couldn't tell. "I want to tell you what it actually costs, and what it actually means." He settled back in the chair. The cane stayed across his knees. And then he started to talk. Part 4, the testimony. He talked for 3 hours. I've tried to reproduce it here as accurately as I can, but I want to be upfront that I'm working from memory and notes I made afterward, and I know I've lost some of it, the specific texture of certain moments, the exact phrasing of things that landed in a way that made me want to write them down and then didn't manage to be written before they slipped. What I have is the shape of it, the sequence, the things that mattered most. He started at the beginning, his beginning. Not a self-promoting story, not a heroics narrative. He started with, he was 20 years old when he enlisted and he was scared. He said that plainly, without apology. He was 20 years old and scared and signed the papers anyway because the war was happening, and people he'd grown up with were already in it. And the alternative was to wait at home and read the casualty reports, which seemed worse. Basic training. He described it as the systematic process of discovering what you were made of and being generally disappointed by the answer, and then deciding to become something better. He said it with dry humor that Veth II rendered as faithfully as she could in Varathi, and there was a ripple through the assembly that I thought might be the Varathi equivalent of reluctant recognition. He talked about his first contact engagement, the first time he was in active fire. He said the thing nobody tells you, the thing the training doesn't replicate, is that the immediate dominant experience is sensory chaos. Too much sound, too much movement, too many simultaneous inputs for your brain to track. And the thing you discover in that chaos is whether you can still make a decision, whether you can still identify the next necessary thing and do it. He said he discovered that he could. That it wasn't easy and it wasn't clean, and there was nothing noble about how it looked from the inside, but the decision-making capacity was there, under the chaos, and once he found it, he learned to trust it. The Varathi, he said at one point, train to optimize what you already are. Your natural capabilities, the armor, the strength, the jaw, you train to use those things to their full potential, which is correct, which is efficient, I respect it. He paused. Human beings train differently. We train to overcome what we are, because what we are naturally is not very well suited for war. He let that sit for a moment. We are soft, we are slow, we bruise, we tire. We get cold and our hands shake, and we need to eat every few hours or our blood sugar drops and our cognitive function degrades. We are, as one of your soldiers observed, prey-shaped. Kreth was very still in the front row. And Olin said, we have fought and won wars that by every physical metric we had no business winning. Not once, not twice, dozens of times, against Dreth exoskeleton infantry. Against Varathi fire squads, against Leth psychological warfare divisions that could induce genuine hallucinations at a range of 500 meters, against environmental conditions that would kill most species in hours. He tilted his head slightly. And we keep winning, improbably, repeatedly, with too small weapons and not enough armor and not enough food and not enough sleep, with pieces of shrapnel lodged in our bodies because the surgery is riskier than the shrapnel. He tapped his leg. Still here? The room was very quiet. Why? He said. That's the question, isn't it? Not luck. I have watched luck fail people. I've watched skilled, careful, experienced soldiers die because the variables went wrong at the wrong moment, and I've watched the luck theory collapse. Luck doesn't explain 40 years of outcomes, so what does? He leaned forward slightly in the chair. I'm going to tell you something about human beings, he said. Something that I've thought about for most of my life and have yet to find a better word for. We are, as a species, profoundly, sometimes catastrophically, unable to accept outcomes we have decided are unacceptable. Not unwilling, unable. There's a mechanism in a human being, when the calculus goes to zero, when the logical outcome of the situation is loss, is retreat, is survival through surrender. There is a mechanism that simply refuses the conclusion and starts looking for the thing you do next anyway. He stopped. The Dreth called it a malfunction, he said. They documented it. In their tactical records from the Seventh War, they described human combatants who continued functioning after sustaining damage that should have produced incapacitation. They couldn't model it. They couldn't predict it, because it's not a tactical capability. It's not a training outcome. It's a characteristic. It's what we are. Another pause. Veth II was translating quietly and steadily, and I could see the soldiers in the assembly absorbing it, and I could see that something had changed in the room, not dramatically, not theatrically, but in the way that understanding changes things, which is slowly and without announcement. I've been shot, Olin said conversationally. 3 times, significant structural damage twice. Once in the chest, once in the left leg, the leg that still doesn't work right, yes. I've been in atmosphere 15% below minimum oxygen levels for extended periods. I've been in close combat with Dreth infantry who outmassed me by 4-1 and had a genuine exoskeletal shell. I've spent 6 hours in a damaged section of Kessel platform in a suit with failing heat management in space cold enough to make the external components crystallize. He said all of this without inflection. I'm 81 years old. I take 17 minutes to get up from a chair. I limp noticeably. I use a cane that my daughter made fun of when I first got it because she thought it made me look like a stage magician. He smiled just briefly. I'm still here, he said. And the Dreth garrison at Kessel platform is a footnote in an archive. He talked about Kessel platform directly after that. He didn't make it heroic. He was deliberate about that. He kept correcting himself when the narrative started to build toward anything that felt like triumph, pulling it back to the ground-level detail of what it actually was. Cold, exhausted, afraid, in pain, making one decision after another because there was no option of not making them. He talked about the 12 other soldiers who hadn't made it through those 6 hours. He said their names, all 12 of them from memory, without hesitation. He said them slowly and clearly, and Veth second translated each one, and I watched the assembly as he did it, and I watched something happen to the Varathi soldiers' postures, something subtle and telling. They recognized it. Not the names, not the people, but the act of carrying them, the act of holding the names of the dead in your memory with the precision of a duty rather than letting them blur into statistics. The Varathi have their own version of this. I would learn later that their unit traditions include complex memorial recitations that their soldiers maintain throughout their careers. The form was different. The thing underneath it was the same. He talked about the Dreth commander in the final hour, the one who had tried to negotiate a surrender of the platform. A reasonable move from a strategic perspective, because by that point there were fewer than 12 humans still operational, and the Dreth had numbers and he could have offered terms. He asked me, Olin said, why we were still fighting. He genuinely wanted to know. He said, and I remember this precisely because I've thought about it many times since he said, you cannot win. This is not contested. I have shown you the numbers. Why are you still in this room? He paused, and I told him, because this room is mine. The cargo bay was completely silent. He didn't understand it, Olin said. Not then. Later, much later, after the compact negotiations, I actually met him again, at a diplomatic function. He'd been involved in the treaty process, and he told me that sentence had stayed with him for 10 years and he still wasn't sure he fully understood it. Olin looked around the room slowly. I don't think it's a complicated idea, but it is a human one. The room is mine. The platform is mine. The corridor, the post, the duty, the people I'm protecting, mine. Not possessively. Not arrogantly, but with a clarity that makes the cost calculation irrelevant, because you're not calculating anymore. You've decided. He sat back. That's what luck looks like from the outside, he said. That's what survived by accident looks like from an archive, but it's not luck and it's not accident. It is, I believe, the most specifically human thing there is.